Hi, my name's Dave and I'm autistic. One of the defining features of autism is that there are problems with social communication. So what is social communication? For me, I've always had problems with friendships and fitting in socially. So this starts pretty early at school. Most autistic people have problems at school. They either aren't part of the clubs, or they find it very difficult to make friends, or they find it very difficult to keep friends. They quite often are the ones who are outside of the groups, and they are quite often bullied. So bullying is a lot more common with autistic people, and unfortunately it's still kind of quite a problem, and can kind of quite colour your school life and how you're brought up. Just even not being part of the group can feel very socially isolating and very difficult. For me, when I was growing up, I always felt like there was a handbook that was missing, that kind of how to be normal, because my brain just didn't work the same way as everybody else's. I just didn't fit in, and the things that I loved and that I would talk about endlessly, no one else was interested in, and they were all interested in other things that were pointless or I just didn't have any interest in. And that meant I really struggled to kind of form those friendships, to get on with people and to work out where I was, how I interacted with others. And when I get down to it and examine it, one of the basic problems that I had right from the earliest time was that I really struggled to identify how other people felt. So most neurotypical people have kind of a built-in automatic subconscious reaction. They can look at someone, they can read their face, they can read their body language, and they can immediately get a sense of how that person is feeling. Are they happy? Are they sad? Is there something wrong? I don't have that. I just don't know how somebody is feeling or thinking or anything is going on. I have to, or I've had to learn that by hand. And sometimes this is by looking at these kinds of diagrams, which kind of describe different ways that people's faces react, and literally learning, okay, this is what happy looks like, this is what sad looks like, and then having to manually apply that to people I'm talking to. Are they looking happy? Are they looking sad? Does this fix with something that I previously recall as like, okay, right, they're smiling, okay, it's looking genuine, okay, they probably are happy then. But that feedback, that immediate contact is so important, because that is what feeds your learning, and that's what feeds the building of friendships. And if I am not getting that feedback and I don't know how people are feeling, then it's much easier for me to go far too bad to far too far with something. So I might make a bad joke and go far too far. It's really inappropriate and it can upset people. And the first I know about it is that it's a major problem. So whereas somebody might say something and then they might get that immediate feedback of oh, okay, well, no, that wasn't received well, maybe that wasn't the right thing to say. I don't necessarily get that feedback. I will make it worse, and I will dig myself a bigger hole before I fall in it. And so that means most of my rules, most of my social rules, I have learned by trial and error. So I am getting pretty good at it now. I'm about 50. I've had about 30, 40 years of really good practice at this stuff. I've ended up having to talk to people quite a bit as part of my job. And I'm pretty good at it nowadays. But when I was growing up, I was pretty terrible. In my teens, I was very bad. In my 20s, I was very bad. But what's happening is that I am learning these rules by trial and error, and I'm applying them in real time as I am talking to people. So when I am sitting here having a conversation with somebody, one-to-one, I am thinking in my head, right, okay, well, we're talking about this, but I'm also thinking, right, am I waving my hands too much? Am I putting my voice up and down enough to make it sound like I'm interesting? Am I too close? Am I made enough eye contact, or is it doing too much eye contact? What are we talking about? Is it even appropriate to talk about things like that? So my brain is kind of doing this dual track thing of thinking about what we're doing and also thinking about how I'm conversing, how many social rules I've got to make sure I'm doing. And the more tired I am, the less social rules I end up managing to put in. And this can cause problems. So, talking to other people with autism spectrum disorders, there's a bunch of quotes, and it seems to be a fairly common experience that they find the world very confusing, very difficult to understand what everybody is going through. So there's quotes like, imagine being growing up and everybody else around you is using sign language and you've never been taught how to interpret sign language. Or imagine trying to find your way through the world where all of the signposts and everything is in kind of confusing language that you can't read, and you've only got the kind of hints and slight nudges in different directions, whereas everybody else can instantly read everything and knows exactly what's going on. Some people have described it by like being in a conversation where there's like 10 or 15 television sets all going off at once, and you're finding it really difficult to kind of filter in on that kind of single conversation that's going on. And I really struggle with that when there's a lot of other conversations going on. Picking out the one that's happening in front of me is a real difficulty of trying to focus on that one person. And my favourite one is from Dan Bull, who's an autistic rapper, and he kind of said, all the world's a stage for which I know didn't audition. And that one really resonates with me. There are so many bits of autism where you're kind of feeling like you're on show, you're feeling like you're the one that everybody's looking at, and yet you don't really want to be. You'd rather be in the background. You'd rather be looking out for other people. And the way that autistic brains work, we find it a lot easier to be a lot more logical and clear and understood of the rules, understand rules and apply the rules efficiently. And that means that we are more like Mr. Spock than Kirk. We're often a lot more logical and think things through and apply the rules consistently, rather than apply them on an emotional basis. So this kind of extends to the actual social communication, the social back and forth, talking back and forth. There's a lot of autistic people who will hear things and take things very, very literally. So if you ask me, what do you want if I say, well, what do you like on your cake? And you write down, or you say to me, oh yes, happy birthday, Dick. Ha ha ha, don't write that. His name is Matt. I will go, that's weird. Okay, that's what you want on your cake. I'll write that down. So we will be very literal because that is the clearest and unambiguous way of talking to people. So I can deal with sarcasm and I can pick it up, but it takes me a second or two to recognize it, and it takes me a second or two to process it. So I am better at it nowadays, but I know that I've struggled with it in the past. The other thing that people can struggle with is metaphors. So talking about putting your foot in your mouth, being a couch potato, being an elephant in the room, these are all kind of common language idioms, but they don't necessarily translate well to an autistic brain. I know these things, and I know if people use them, then I go and look them up on an internal list of what does that actually mean. Oh, right, that means this. So that means you actually meant this behavior or this problem or this meaning. But it takes me another second or two. In a similar way, people from other languages may have idioms and local idioms that mean perfectly good things in their languages that sound very odd when translated into English. So being very clear about your communication, being very honest and accurate about that communication, and not using things like sarcasm, not using things like talking in metaphors, can help everybody understand you. And that really means things like hints do not work. I do not pick up any hints or body language. So I can pick up some things, but they're often things that I have learnt and I will recognise by applying the rules. But a lot of hints, a lot of the subtle language and a lot of the subtle behaviour I just miss on a day-to-day basis. So do not use hints. Talking to an autistic person, use very clear, definite language. Ask very specific, direct questions. The smaller you can make the topic of that question, the better. And definitely don't use sarcasm, because you may get exactly what you ask for. Particularly in a work environment, this can be a huge problem. And this is so important, really do not use body language or hints. You may think it was really obvious that you meant that you were joking, or that you meant that you were being sarcastic by including a body language, by including an extra gesture or something like that. That isn't always received, and if it goes wrong, it's often our fault for not picking up on it. That seems very unfair. So one thing that we're often accused of being rude, and quite often it's because if I am not thinking about communicating, if I'm not thinking about talking to you, my default expression will go back to a very neutral expression, and that can look like resting bitch face. It can look like I'm really peed off. It's not always the case. It's because my body language is to some extent simulated, or I am doing a lot of it consciously, and if I forget to do it consciously, then you just don't see anything, and that can come across as being both very not genuine. It can come across as if I am kind of telling lies, or I'm not quite understanding, or there's something wrong with the communication. And quite often that's a very subtle thing that people don't realise what's going on. So my body language can be odd because I'm not remembering to do things, and my expression, particularly when I'm kind of sitting there not actively engaged with you, I can look really, really peed off. That isn't always the case. With an autistic person, you may have to actually ask them, rather than relying on your default setting of just going, oh, automatic signals. Is this person okay? And an autistic person may be perfectly happy. So that means that we run afoul of lots of social rules, either because we haven't really understood what's going on, or because we've never been in a situation where we've been able to kind of like work out what the rule is and what is and isn't allowed. Lots of these social rules are unwritten. And lots of them you only find out by banging into the edges. So things like how close are you allowed to stand to someone? I'm a pretty tall guy. By default, I think I will stand far too close to people, and it's quite uncomfortable for people when I'm standing too close and I'm a lot taller. It can make them feel very uncomfortable. I can be quite bad at the amount of social distance. I will end up pushing trolleys quite close to people, and there's kind of an automatic space that people leave in supermarkets with trolleys between you and the next person. My daughter keeps having to yank me back and say, like, no, too close to other people. And really, we can kind of really struggle with things like small talk, which is the kind of the social glue, the kind of like meaningless stuff. How was the weather? Did you get here okay? Those kind of things. We can really struggle because there's no rules on what you're allowed to talk about, what you're not allowed to talk about. We've got no idea what the kind of the real standard responses or the sensible responses are, because often if people say like, oh, are you okay? They don't actually mean, oh, tell me about your current problem. They mean, oh, is there anything absolutely earth-shatteringly wrong that I need to deal with right now, or can I just ignore it for a bit? So small talk we can really struggle with because we prefer talking about different things. And we can really struggle to start and stop conversations. And we can really struggle with what those conversations are about. We can have very, very strong special interests where my brain will be really, really wired up. I will have a lump of neurons in that area and I will know everything there is to know about a particular topic. And I might try and explain all that to you, and you might not be that interested in it. So we can be kind of quite intense. We can be kind of like quite one-sided. If we're onto that topic of oh, I love this topic, I'm telling you about this particular thing, I can be going over and over it, and you can be giving lots and lots of body language signals that you're not interested and you're bored and you need it to stop, and that just doesn't go in. You won't get any response. So you may have to be very clear about, that's really interesting, but we need to move on to this topic we do have to talk about, or that's really interesting, but I don't have time and we have to go. Because starting that conversation can be difficult. So I can end up standing next to people trying to work out, if they're already in a conversation, when is an appropriate time to kind of butt in and start talking about something. That can be a problem. And then stopping. When is the conversation done? When do we need to move on? When do we need to go on with something else? And lastly, a note on empathy. So this is something that autistic people get accused of not having enough empathy or not having empathy for other people, when the reality is kind of a lot more complicated. If you look at empathy, it's actually quite a complicated scenario to go through. First of all, I've got to read and understand the emotions of other people. So, like I've already said, if I'm already kind of like struggling with kind of like recognizing other people's emotions or recognizing their behavior and body language, then that can kind of throw problems into the emotions that I'm dealing with. I've got to understand the situation, the social situation. So quite a lot of the situations where people get upset, it's a complicated social situation. Maybe somebody's made an error. Maybe somebody's done something to you that you don't like. Understanding that situation can be a tricky minefield. The middle bit of caring and wanting to help you is, by all accounts, actually fairly present and fairly reliable in most autistic people. So most autistic people, the research says that they care and they want to help in most situations. They're around the same levels of neurotypical people that they want to help. But one of the problems is that in order to try and help, I have to predict your emotional response and predict what action is appropriate to take with you. And it's not as simple as putting myself in your situation. Because I'm autistic, if I am upset, if something has gone wrong, a lot of the time I do not want a big hug. I want to be kind of left alone, there's too much going on, I need to be left alone, and I need to kind of think it through quietly and in my own space and my own time. So if I notice that you're upset and I apply that to you, okay, you're upset, you need obviously alone time, I'm just going to leave you alone to like manage your own thoughts and, you know, calm back down. That is seen as being non-empathetic. What I actually need to do is predict your emotional response in that you need a big hug and that will make you feel better, despite the fact that that would be the last thing that I would want in that situation. And then I have to then go and do that. So I have to go and give you a big hug, say everything's going to be okay, we're going to talk it all out. And that is a complex thing, and it can go wrong beforehand if I misunderstand what's going on, or if I miss the signals of like you being upset, or if you're saying, what's wrong? Everything's fine. Okay, everything's fine. No problem. Then that often is a sign that not everything is fine. So that can be confusing beforehand, and then taking the appropriate action can be difficult. So most of us, to some extent, most autistic people do pretend to be normal a lot of the time. We end up pretending to be normal. We end up learning those kind of social cues, learning what the normal behavior is, and we try and replay that back to everybody to try and pretend that we're normal too. We're often thinking about different things, and we're often managing it in different ways. Some people are very, very good at this. Some people are less good at this. And some people are very good at it, but it takes a lot of energy. On the other hand, other autistic people can end up going, well, screw you guys. If you're going to be horrible to me and you're going to leave me out the clubs and you're not going to invite me to things, then screw you guys. I'm done with you. And they can become very spiky. So they can push away people, and they can say, well, I don't want to be part of your group. I'm going to kind of like, you know, and do my own thing. And they can become rebels and become quite argumentative and can push people away actively. Yet more autistic people can kind of become turtles or tortoises. They develop a kind of hard, thick outer shell. I kind of did this at school. I just pretended that nothing really affected me. I tried to be as normal as I could and tried to fit in as much as I could, but it didn't really work terribly well. But I would pretend that nothing else affected me. So even if I was upset, it was easier not to admit that, and I would hide that, and I would kind of still push people away or keep them at arm's length without letting them get too close. So with all this going on, there is a fair amount of stress and anxiety and overthinking going on in most people's autistic brains. There's kind of like the rates of anxiety and depression run at somewhere between 60 to 80% of autistic people also have diagnosed problems with depression or anxiety. It's a pretty common comorbid condition. It's common that you will have those along those. And lots of that is like this fear of being found out, this fear of being, well, what if I make mistakes in public? Maybe people are going to realize that my brain's not the same as everybody else. Maybe they're going to realize that I'm not normal. We can be really quite uncomfortable and really fearful in new situations where we don't know the rules, we don't know how to act, we don't know what's going on, we don't know how things are going to make us feel. And there's a very strong kind of underlying common factor of a lot of autistic people really hate being misunderstood. They often like to be very, very clear and direct in their communication, and sometimes that is misinterpreted and misunderstood as being funny or sarcastic, and that can really get your back up. It can be really, really frustrating when you are trying to be very clear and very accurate and being honest and open, and you're misunderstood, and then you're accused of being sarcastic, or you're accused of being something that you didn't do. That can feel very, very unfair and very uncomfortable. So all of this going on and all of this overthinking means that it's really tiring, and there's a lot going on, and it's quite often there's a lot of stress and anxiety that goes along with that. So probably enough for today. As always, practice kindness and empathy, because you don't always see what's going on in people's heads. Be kind to others, be kind to yourself. And if you like the video, like, subscribe, and I'm interested in your comments. If you think I'm right, if you think I'm wrong, let me know. I'm interested in what you have to say. I'm really interested if you disagree with me, and I'm interested in how it feels to you. If you're autistic, let me know how you feel. Thanks very much. Bye for now.